Get real advice from renowned experts and entrepreneurs on today's business leaders. Here's your host, Gabe Arnold.
All right, on today's show, I have Norty Cohen, and he is the founder of many amazing ideas. His business is called Moosylvania, and we're going to talk today about the top 10 things you need to know about entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about some things that Marty and I have in common, and Norty, have in common. And I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Norty. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I always start out and ask. I always like to know kind of how what journey you took to get here. So, when did you first realize that you were an entrepreneur, Norty?
Yeah, I went to school to be a writer and a journalist, and I came out and the best paying jobs were in sales, and I took a job as an ad sales guy, and I realized I could just make stuff up to get people to buy ads, and that's how I sort of got into the marketing businesses. I just used the creativity, and I worked for people for about 4 or 5 years, and at that point, I just naturally evolved into creating my own business, and figured out who I needed to collaborate with to kind of go from there. And I was a business owner of an agency really for about 10, 15 years, and then we sold that business, and then I started my current agency in '03. So I've been doing it for the better part of my career, being my own boss.
That's really awesome. I don't know if I've ever heard. I've done well over 100 interviews now on this show and talked to many entrepreneurs. I don't know if I've ever heard the path of writer to salesman to entrepreneur. For me, it was good at sales, became entrepreneurial, learned writing and learned the marketing and stuff on the back end. So that's a pretty interesting path. And I like what you said too about you figured out in sales, in some senses you could kind of make up whatever you wanted and then deliver it on the back end. So that's
Yeah.
I've definitely sold plenty of things that I wasn't 100% sure how I was going to deliver, but then delivered them, after I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But I think along the way, I had the fortune of when I created my own business, and I was a partner for a number of years in the first business. And when I created my own business in '03, we bought a building, and I had been through this stuff with landlords where, when you have a landlord, you're basically committing to a fairly long-term period that you have to sort of project your how much you're going to need, then sign up your house as the mortgage or whatever to guarantee that. And so it creates a whole nother level of stress. And so I after a few years realized I could buy a building. Well, I ended up finding this 100-year-old church that we got federal and state tax recognition for. And we were able to bring it up to life and really I had 80 to 100 people in there at that point. But the church came with a school. And so I created a whole other business for the school because I owned it already. So we ran that business. I had a market research business in there, and I hired the people and did the other stuff with that. So I had two businesses going. And then we got to a point where people weren't really going anywhere for research, and everything was going to online. So I sold that to a chain of research focus groups company, and then basically then converted that space. They rented from me, then they left. I converted that space into like a WeWork.
oh wow.
And now I have this passive income. I have all these renters who are in that space. So I have, and then they ultimately pay the mortgage on the building. So the rest of it just kind of becomes the way to work. And that's what
really,
I've done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've seen recently too, even more so. It sounds like you did it. When did you buy the church, or when did you buy the building?
I bought it in '06.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say
Yeah.
I've seen more of that in the last 5 to 10 years, of where I've seen big old churches or empty buildings like that converted into those co-working spaces. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting that you got into that way ahead of the popularity of
Oh,
had the asset ahead of time at least.
And one of the things that we're going to talk about, and I want to say it's number 3 or 4 or 5 in my list, is using what you have to figure out how to make it into a business,
Yeah.
and taking your current resources and turning those into things that can make money for you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely.
that definitely works.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I would love to dive right into that. Why don't you talk us through these top 10 things that as an entrepreneur you need to know? Like I said, you've got a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom, and I love what you had shared and sent over. So I think this will be valuable to the audience.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking forward to. I love to help new people think about entrepreneurialism. And I don't know if you're listening or watching where you are in the chain, but the idea of creating new ideas to me is like an ongoing thing. It's pretty much like going to the gym. It's like you have to let your brain keep thinking of new ideas all the time. And there's going to be some little twist that is going to make sense either for your current business or for another business. But I constantly churn ideas and think of stuff, and I try to find collaborators who are willing to, like, hang with me and bounce, and not try to get so dogmatic about any one idea. Just throw a lot of ideas out there and see how people react to them. So I'm constantly thinking of ideas, and um, one of the things about having an idea is having an idea on how you're going to do it. Like, you can have an idea like, oh, that's great, I'd like to have a new social network. Well, how am I going to execute that? I don't have this or that. So you have to, like, decide what it is you're going to do and then how you're going to do it. I was teaching an adjunct class at WashU, and I had this deck, and I had a whole group of people out there, and it was out on their medical school campus. And I'm asking people, well, what ideas do you have? Like, tell me what ideas you have. Let's start working with them. Like, let me hear what you've got. And so there was a guy who had, like, an authentic barbecue sauce. And it's like, okay, we got to think through authentic barbecue sauce. What's the margin on it? How are we going to manufacture it? Are you going to co-manufacture it? Are you going to find a co-packer? Are you going to make it yourself? Is your mom making it? How are we going to distribute it? Who's the sales force? Let's run all this stuff and let's figure out what this is worth. And so I'm doing this whole exercise with these people, and it's kind of like, well, I don't know, maybe this is worth like 20 cents a jar when we get done with it. Is this really what you want to do? Just know what it is, and think through it. But it's good that you have an idea, and I'm glad you're passionate. And I'm like, does anyone else have an idea? And this guy raises his hand, and he says, yeah, I have an idea. I've created a pacemaker that operates off the kinetic energy of the human body. So therefore, batteries wouldn't be necessary for pacemakers, and no one would die.
Wow.
And I'm like, I need you to stay after class. We got to talk about this. And so it's like, people can have any idea. It's kind of like, well, this guy was so far along. He was like, he had $5 million in money already. So,
Wow.
but the idea is that everything's an idea. Just figure out what you're going to do with it and how you're going to make it happen. And be aware that, a path to making it happen is really a real big part of it, and the more ideas you have, the better, but know that you got to figure out a way to get it done. So
Yeah, definitely.
that's rule number one.
Yeah, and I think thinking like what you just said was perfect, like thinking through all the different stages of what it's going to take for somebody that's and this probably leads into number two a little bit too, but for somebody that has the idea but doesn't have the knowledge of the execution of the how. Obviously, I know they can reach to you, and like obviously they can talk to me. Like there's probably, we're here, but is there any qualifiers of how you've said, oh, if you have an idea, here's who you need to reach to figure out the how to or the execution of it? Is there any parameters or guidelines you've thought of on that front?
And the thing is, I'm kind of a self-taught entrepreneur. And there's certainly a lot of business classes that are out there in terms of how to do things. What I look at it as is, like, break it down to understand what the costs are, get a simple pro forma together that allows you to say, here's what I potentially could sell it for, and here's what my cost of goods is, and just decide if it's something that you think has potential, early on, and then go find people that have been doing it and ask the questions. When I bought the research business, I went over to WashU, and I met with the grad students, and I had them doing, actually, we didn't know what we were going to put in the building, so we just started running business plans. We thought, well, what if we did a school and we taught people the marketing business? How much is that worth? And so then we found all these people that had all these sort of marketing finishing schools, creative finishing schools. There's like Creative Circus in Atlanta, and there was another one called Brain something in Minneapolis. So like, how do they work? How much do they charge? What is it? How much do you have to pay the administrator? So we looked at all that, and then we looked at the operating capital to make that business happen. Then I looked at the research business, and one of the grad students said, hey, there's these chains of research facilities. You could just become affiliated. So I'm like, well, let's go into that. So then we found the right people, and we ran that pro forma. And it's like, well, this requires really none of my time, and I can make this work, and I can, have this affiliation and run this business. So we're going to go that and try that idea. And, that was really, I think, the way to do it is just ask around and do some research.
Cool.
So that's that. Hopefully I'm beginning to give some people some ideas that they could take from this.
Yeah.
But it's I think the second thought is, who are you? Are you just the person who thought of the idea? Or are you the person that wants to sweat it out? And businesses take time to develop, and we're in an immediate gratification world. Are you willing? Do you believe in the idea enough that you want to give 2, 3, 5 years to making it reality?
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, that's the question.
Yeah, I love what you said there. Like in your notes, you said like there's a difference between an entrepreneur and an inventor, and I think we hear about some of the inventors that were also entrepreneurial, but they're not the same thing. And I've definitely met people that have invented things, and even like the guy you mentioned earlier, who's like, oh, I created this pacemaker. He could have just been the inventor, or like you said, there's a huge amount of effort and blood, sweat, and tears that goes into being an entrepreneur. And another one of my guests and friends, Amir Pazdarek, he said one time to me, he said, what an entrepreneur goes through in one day would kill most people. And it's a different life when you go that route, I think.
Listen, and I've heard you talk about it, and I've heard your other guests talk about it. Look, when you're in business for yourself, you control your own destiny. There's less risk, and it's not. It's one of the things that they used to teach at WashU was what's riskier, taking a job at a big company or being your own boss. And I know you've covered this topic because I've heard you talk about it.
Yeah.
Trust yourself, and then you can work with it. At least you know what you can do and not do.
Yeah.
And so, but again, I think, do you want to be an entrepreneur? And I think there's obviously a lot written about it, but you have to have, sort of that bootstrap mentality to say, well, I can do something else until that moment I jump off. The book that talks about Warby Parker, and how Warby Parker started, when those 3 guys basically were in school at one of the Ivy League schools, and they raised their hand and told the teacher they had this idea, and the teacher said, well, what are you going to do? And they said, oh, well, I'm taking a job at DuPont, and I'm taking a job here, and they're like, what, you have this idea of doing glasses by mail? And they're like, yeah, but we don't know if it's going to work yet. And when they originally started Warby Parker, they thought they were going to send prescription glasses by mail back and forth to see if people liked them.
Yeah.
And trial and error, they figured out they didn't need to. And then they quit their other jobs.
Yep.
So everybody has to say, what's your path and how you want to get there? But Adam Grant, who wrote that story in one of his books, was basically saying he was the college professor that said, "Oh, sorry, you're not dedicated enough. I'm not going to invest in you."
Wow.
And in the book, he's like, "And I'm still a college professor." So it's kind of like you've got to take risk.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what that one.
Yep. And I've seen both be successful. I'm glad you brought it up of like I've seen people that build a business on the side and then when they have a good nest egg or they're stable, they step off into the business. I've also seen people that say burn the boats and go for it. And it does come down to knowing yourself. What do you want and what can you withstand is definitely a good thing to understand before you make that decision.
Now, one of the things that I think that Adam Grant says is that people that are successful, that are successful entrepreneurs, basically do sort of qualified risk. They don't take everything all the way. They give themselves room to fail
Hmm.
and try some things. Yeah, but that's an interesting book that he wrote. I think the next question that we talk about is, are you a founder or a team member? And I think when you have an idea and you're trying to enlist support, you got to decide what kind of person you are. How do you like to work with other people? And do you want to just be the person that came up with it, or you want to be the person that's going to like do some of the work and then find other people that want to do parts of it? I think everybody that, and we talked about this briefly, but 95% of people in the world just want a job, and you're the one coming up with the jobs. You got to kind of figure out where you fit and what you want to do, and you have to get that clear, because if you start off saying I'm doing this and I'm part of it, great, but if you're just trying to get other people, they may or may not follow you, so you have to be aware of that.
Yeah. No, I'm
Uh,
always super grateful for I have amazing team members and I always say like we were chatting earlier, like if the world was only full of entrepreneurs, it would be chaotic at best. And so there's definitely a balance and knowing where you fit is huge because I have team members that are super entrepreneurial that do really well for us. I have other team members who, don't have any interest in owning their own business, and I don't blame them at all, but they're still amazing contributors. And so, yeah, getting clear on
yeah,
definitely helps you because if you're in, I've never really explored or researched this term a lot, but as I've heard people talk about being an intrapreneur, I've heard
yes.
people relate that to being, oh, like you can be inside of an organization and be visionary and build and help, but you don't have the whole risk of being the entrepreneur. And like that's a incredibly valuable role that I have amazing leaders on my team that fill as well. So there's not a right answer. It's a definitely knowing what you want out of life for sure.
There's a book called A Company of One that sort of bridges that thought. And what it's talking about is to say, what is it that you do that is valuable that you're creating, whether or not you want to do it for as your own business or do it inside of another organization, but know who you are and what you do. But that just came out recently, I think.
It's cool.
Um, the next thought is, and really, I think it kind of plays into what we just said is when I start a business and I start an idea, there's three things we have to have. And one is you have to have good people around you that you feel really good about. And part of that is really understanding where their heads are at that moment. People have different headspace and they may have other things going on. You kind of have to make that decision to say, look, you were my great coworker for all these years, and I want you to be in this with me. And then they get into it and they're like, no, I really don't have this. I don't really have the energy for this now. And then your friendship gets weird. So you have to kind of say, okay, is this the right person that's motivated to be on the team? And then I think you need a product or service that's truly needed. And I think one of the things that we're seeing, and I was just reading some stuff about it before we got on, is that the need for originality, original ideas, when it comes to products and services, is really important because you can jump on and do the exact same TikTok video that somebody else did. You can do that. And is it funny? Yes. Did you make the same exact motion and you shared it and people liked it? Yes. That doesn't mean that there's a product idea that you can just go, oh, I'll do the exact same thing somebody else did.
Yeah.
And so our society is rewarding people to go, oh, I'm going to just do this copycat thing. But ultimately, if you're going to be successful, you got to figure out how to do something that's original and unique and ownable, And I mean, it's like one of the reasons that, I named my company Moosylvania was nobody else was naming their, it wasn't Cohen and Associates, Like
Yeah,
I had a people would be like, well, what is that about? Like, at least it's different.
kidding.
And as weird as people looked at me crazy for years, and then they were like, "Oh, Moose, sure, I know you guys." So it's like it's just that ability to do something unique. And then really the third leg of the stool is the ability to start it up for as little money as possible. And I love the idea of just getting little trial balloons out there and trying things and saying, I'm going to get this idea done and I'm going to prove a model in one way or another. I'm going to create something that people can react to.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to know that it's something that people are going to want. Because if I can start it for a little bit of money, I can use my real money to keep it going. And that's where I think people could fall down.
Yeah, and man, we're in such alignment there because I've always super struggled with like the VC world, and because most or often, because I've worked in tons of funded startups as being a vendor or helping them or consulting. I've seen it happen so many times, and I feel like a huge percentage of the time, maybe 80-90% of the time, people that took VC never should have taken the money at that stage. They should have gone out and proved their idea, and then like you said, when it was actually working, then funding makes sense. But sometimes I feel like going for money before you put it out there and actually get a handful of customers first is a way to just, I don't know, it just skews the perspective of what really has to happen in business. So
It's kind of counterintuitive to why you did it in the first place, because ultimately you're doing it because you can be your own boss. And as soon
right.
as you take someone's money, they're the boss.
Exactly.
And you like it or not, and you could be the shittiest investment they ever made. Sorry, I shouldn't probably say that. You should be the worst investment they've ever made because you don't even give them a monthly statement or a quarterly statement or whatever. But ultimately, you still owe them something. You got
Right.
to report to them and you got to tell them what you're doing. And now you're justifying and da 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 da. So yeah, figure it out first so you don't have to backtrack
Right.
later.
You have a better position if you do. I think taking investment is a good idea, but it should be on your terms, and it shouldn't be where you lose majority control. And again, like you said, going straight to getting investor is just getting another boss, and that can be a disaster, especially if you've never gotten investment before. So
Well, I mean, I could go down a whole nother rabbit hole saying at some point you have to have the operating agreement structured correctly so that you have the power to do what you need to do.
yeah,
But that you just need to get attorneys for that. And you need to think through it. I mean, don't get an operating agreement off of like a web form, like
actually pay
think
for it.
through and again, yeah, because you might think you don't need it because you're just starting and your company's worth zero and your revenue is zero, but ultimately you still have to have a plan for how you're going to treat all the different inputs.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, so the next one, did you guys ever? I mean, this is probably before your time, but there was a detective show called MacGyver, and MacGyver would show up in this show, and he would take anything that he could find and solve a problem. Like he'd have like a book of matches in his pocket, and he would turn that into something else, and then he would create something and get himself out of all kinds of troubles. And I always talk about like the MacGyver plan. It's like, what do you already have that you could make something out of? So, and the reason I told you the story about the office building and having that school was I already had the school. Like now I just needed to make something with it, and I could afford to have trial and error. And when I went even going through like the last year or so with having my own space, yeah, I had a few tenants that came and said I need some rent relief or whatever, but it didn't really hurt me because I already owned the building. I didn't owe anybody else anything.
Yeah,
So yeah, it was not as great as it could have been, but it wasn't terrible. And ultimately people wanted to have like a little glass box to go to work in. But even so, it's like I created something with what I already had. So it didn't hurt me to make a mistake. And so I think you just have to look at what do you own? What resources that you have? You think about, like, if you wanted to be a baker and you go, okay, I like to make cookies. What do I own? Okay. Oh, I don't really own anything. Okay, great. You know what you need? You need to find someone that has a bakery that's no one's using it between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. and
Yeah.
rent that. Like, what do you get? What do you have that's out there that you can get? Don't buy a bakery, you know, until people want to buy your cookies. That's the idea of just using what you have and doing it really well. And,
Yeah.
and
Bootstrapping
when
bootstrapping
you do,
using what you have is definitely lowers your risk. And it makes it, like you said, then you're not laying out a bunch of capital or time even before you know if anybody even likes your idea. So
I when my son was in business school, and I was coming to visit him, and he and his classmates. This was his undergraduate, and I was coming to visit him, and he's like, we have an idea, and we need to talk to you, and we're going to meet you at the airport." And I flew in, wherever they were, and there was like all these college kids, and they're like, "Here's our idea. We're going to sell pizzas on campus between like 11 p.m. and 3 in the morning. People are too messed up to drive. We're gonna have these pizza trucks. They're gonna have like an auga horn. We're gonna pull up to the dorm. We're gonna hit the auga horn. Everyone's gonna run out, and we're gonna sell pizzas. And this is it. We don't even need to graduate. We have got this figured out." So I go, "Okay, let's go to work. Let's start talking about it. How much for the dough? How are we going to get the ovens? Who's going to work it? Do you want to work in the truck? Are you good? Can I count on you to be in the truck from like 9 p.m. to like 4 a.m. the next day? Are you signing up for this? Or are we hiring somebody else to do this?" And the more I went through it with these kids, they were like, "Okay, we don't really want to be in the pizza business. We've kind of figured that out." But just have to ask yourself those questions and run it down.
Yeah.
Is it a good idea? Yeah, it's a good idea. Who wants to do it? Not them.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach it. Actually break down the jobs and the roles and the time for sure.
Um, but yeah, that was just so funny because they were sure that they had it. That was it. We don't need to graduate. We got it. Um, so the next one is really do the competitive research to figure out what else is out there. And I think, I just don't think you can do that enough. I think there's so many places to find good ideas and talk to people, and people will talk to you. One of the easiest ways to find people who know a business is the help wanted ads, or to not even help wanted ad. That's kind of an old term, but the whole search industry for talent. And I know you do a lot with that. But if you find people who have or who are not working right now that have expertise, you could certainly, pay them a consulting fee, give them $500 to answer your questions. They'll be thrilled to hear from you,
Mhm.
and they could teach you the whole business. Like, just ask the questions. Don't make the market teach you what they already know.
Yeah, no kidding.
I could tell you there's no market for that. Oh, well, why did I spend all this money to find that out? Right. And just ask those questions. So, I mean, I was working on an idea, and I'll get an insight, and I'll get an idea, and then I'll have somebody do a little bit of research, or I'll have a little bit of creative work done on it to see what it is. But one of the ideas I had revolved around trying to sell some things um, that were like really targeting women who had money. And so I was looking at jewelry as this idea, and I started talking to this guy that he had just left Claire's, which was like a costume jewelry business. And I just felt like the guy just kind of slapped me silly. Like, what do you really think? You really think people are going to spend money this way or that way? And it's like, logical to me. It's kind of like, okay, just find somebody that's on the beach and they're going to answer questions for you. It's not that hard.
Yeah, you're right. Like doing the problem is this. I think I think these are all such key points, and I think that I've seen people fail at this step more than anything else. And it's like the most basic one. It's really not as time consuming as you'd think. Like you said, have a few conversations and you're way farther down the road than just putting an offer out there without having done it at all. And it guarantees your success or your failure if you skip this step. And so yeah, we're working on a huge project right now for a international logistics company is the easiest way to describe it without getting in too deep. And instead of me just assuming about this stuff, I called one of my friends that's in the space and said, "Hey, can I pay you for, a couple hours of your time and you explain everything about what it is?" And he uncovered two things that I would have never realized and that I don't even think my client realized about this specific segment of their market. And a little bit of time, basically no money. We avoided wasting probably $30,000 to $50,000 on something that wouldn't have worked. And we have to shift, like, it's huge.
Well, and which is why the idea of like sharing your insight with people pays you back. Like another book that Adam Grant wrote was called Give and Take, where it's kind of like just put good ideas out there. You don't know if it's going to come back,
Yeah,
but you know that someone's going to give you a good idea at some point.
exactly.
Like just be open to helping other people, and it goes from there. I mean, I always talk to when, particularly when we had the ability to let people in the building, anybody that was looking for a job, I would sit and talk to them and sort of brainstorm with them on what they could do. And a lot of those people ended up being resources or business just because I just gave them the time. I was just nice to them, and they gave me an idea I didn't think of. So you just have to put it out there.
Definitely.
The next one is trying to figure out how to test the idea with real customers and consumers. We all run into this, but it's like everything sounds good to your friends. I mean, really,
Yeah.
and you've got an idea and you're running it by the people that want you to be successful, and they're shaking their head, and you're like going, it totally makes sense to me, and they're like, yeah, great, but that's not your market, and you're going to have to figure out who the real market is in order to get to that test.
Yeah, I've always said to people, and I probably could improve how I phrase it, but I always say, like, you don't have a real idea until a customer pays you for it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like that's it, and that's probably like in this conversation, I'm realizing I should probably be more clear. Like, you can have all the ideas you want, but you don't have a valid business idea until you got
yeah.
your first, payment or a handful of people that actually bought into it. And you're right, like you could think it's the greatest idea. Of course, your friends, and people that care about you aren't going to, hopefully, won't discourage you about it, but may buy in. But they're not a effective measure of value of the idea or if it's going to work. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So to kind of keep moving, that's along that same line is, so now you want to get buy-in from critics. You want people who have a reason to sort of tell you why it won't work to speak up. And you need to hear as much as you can from people that might not like your idea to say what would have had to have worked. And and um, and that's, I think, the second part of that idea. Um, the next thing that I like to talk about is a pro forma calculator. And I found this calculator thing online like a long time ago. It was some like little web tool where basically it just let you put in all of your costs of goods, and then uh, what your revenue was, your top line, and you were able to kind of quickly see what it would pay out. And for me, as a self-taught entrepreneur, and I didn't go to business school, this is how I look at an idea. It's like, let me just run it through a quick number thing, just like I did with the pizza with the kids.
Yeah.
It's like, how much does this cost? Is this really going to be worth it? Have you thought about all your other pieces, particularly your employee costs, your other business costs of running a business, et cetera? And then and then look at it and say, what's the real value of this thing over a period of time? And can it work? And really the key to that is the next one, which is rinse and repeat. You got to run a dozen ideas through that calculator to get there, and always have two or three like in the hopper. Like I always have two or three ideas that I haven't given up on. I'm just like thinking about how I'm going to get them done. I'm waiting till I hear the right idea that goes with it, or I'm just looking at it thinking, I think this is going to work, but I'm not going to pull the trigger yet just to see where it goes. But I rarely have a day that I don't think of a new idea. It's whether or not I'm going to do it or not. And I think we talked about this a little bit. It's like, give yourself that room to have lots of ideas.
Yeah.
And then have fun with it.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, I think it's taken me time. Like I started building and selling things and was entrepreneurial as a teenager, over 20 years ago. However, I think it's taken me probably until the last 5 or 6 years to get good at what you just talked about. And this is a key secret, I think, in being successful as an entrepreneur long term, is accept all the ideas and collect them or write them down, but then have a process to vet them before you just jump into them. Like you're talking about the pizza truck idea. Like there's some validity to that idea, but if they would have just jumped into it, they probably would have either lost a bunch of money or been miserable or both, because they didn't just run through and cycle and filter it. And I really honestly, I've never thought about it this way, because I usually go to the logistics first. I really like the idea of saying, hey, just do the pro forma first. And for people that aren't familiar with that, and I'm the same way as you, Norty, I'm 100% self-taught and didn't really graduate high school. So I'm not in academia in the traditional sense, academic, but just listing out oh, here's my labor, here's my costs, here's the time involved. Starting with a simple, just financial plan like that. And like you said, there's plenty of tools, or even you can just list it out and add it up. And then I would always encourage people, add in another 20 to 40% of unknowns, because you don't know all the things you don't know. Going that route is a great way to filter ideas. And I've learned recently that if I do a little bit of vetting of an idea, two good things come out of it for me. One is that I actually satisfy my entrepreneurial itch, even if I realize the idea is a bad idea. And I can cycle through it without investing a ton of time or money, because I used to literally just start every idea I had, and that's not a good idea at all.
Well, no, and yeah, so and a lot of times what happens for me now is people come to me with ideas, and then I do that same gymnastic as the pizza thing, but I have this little format that I can drill through. It's just this little spreadsheet thing, and someone did come to me with a doggy daycare business about 5 years ago, and we started going through it, and it's like, wait a minute, what do you really need here? And it's like, wait, you just need some property. And then we figured out where to find some property and what the rent and the insurance would be. And it's like, well, how much is the labor? Oh, it's all $10-12 an hour day labor. Oh, so you don't actually have any real employee things. You got one manager. I'm like, I kind of like this business.
Yeah.
This is a good one, So you hear an idea and you can go, oh, maybe that's a good one. So maybe it's not you that comes up with it. Maybe it's just somebody else comes to you and says, I think I want to do this. Just, run through it. That woman that I did that doggy daycare thing with, she's really successful.
Awesome.
And it was funny because I called there to take my dog or something. They're like, oh, we're putting you on hold and blah, blah, blah. I go, excuse me, I'm the guy that was here day one, and they're like, we don't even know you. We have so many customers. Like, oh, shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's it. That to me, it's like, have fun, circulate a lot of ideas, talk to people, be good to people. People ask you for something, give it back. Try it. And think of ideas, and again, realize a very small percentage of people are willing to do that. And when you do, you get rewarded, one way or another, you will get rewarded.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I love what you said. Yeah, it is a small percentage of people that are willing to do it. There's a small percentage of ideas that have the components to execute on. And the couple things that stand out for me that you shared are, one is like, just be willing to help people vet out their ideas or help them or talk through that. Because like I mentioned earlier, when I talked to my friend, I said, hey, I want to pay you for some time because you're an expert in this industry. And he ended up saying, and I had already budgeted and committed the money in my mind to it. At the end, he's like, no way. He's like, you're not paying me. He's like, you help me all the time. And like, so the give and take there, like you said, is key, because that builds a real community of entrepreneurs around you. And then the other thing that comes to mind for me, and we've started to do this internally on our team, is to label for yourself or ask somebody with this label to poke holes in your ideas. We'll say, hey, can you play devil's advocate for me and show me all the holes or the bad parts of my idea? Because then you've labeled it as the person trying to help you, and they're not personally attacking you. And it's actually framed a lot of our brainstorming, conversations internally and with clients better by saying, hey, if it's okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I want to make sure we're not missing anything that could hurt you down the road. And approaching it that way, I think you can actually get valuable criticism out of friends and family or people on your team. And you can also provide criticism in a more user-friendly way, in a sense, because people know, oh, I'm just trying to poke holes in it to help you. So that's something else that, as you were sharing that, made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. One build I have on your idea, when you're doing sort of collaborative, that whole endorsement piece where you present something, you try to get endorsed. That was one of the things that I talked a lot about with the WashU professors. It's like, create something for people to be able to understand the idea, like make like a little storybook deck of what it is you're talking about, and give something to people, to give them something to react to. So it's not just all your verbal speaking. You can then send them something, let them think about it. And then the other thought that I had is, the other thing that works for me when people are doing me little favors like that is, I love Amazon gift cards. It takes like 30 seconds. You already had their phone number. You just called them up. You put the phone number in. You send them the Amazon gift card, and it delivers instantly, and it's out of your head. And you did something nice for someone.
Yeah. And they get what they want out of it too. So it's a perfect gift regardless. So
not going to use it, and you just said, hey, listen, I appreciate you doing that. I'm sending you this thing. Same as buying them lunch.
Exactly.
But man, I really appreciate the opportunity to share, and hopefully we gave some people some ideas. I sent you the deck. If you want to make it available on your site, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll share that with you. Put that in the show notes, because Norty shared just these 10 questions and 10 things to think through. And as we kind of wrap up here, who are you looking to work with, and what's the best way for them to connect with you and your team, Norty?
Yeah, no, I think, my business is really, consumer product oriented. We do a lot of big brand sort of concept development, as well as media and conversion. So I think for me, it's like, unless someone has something that they're influenced with, or they might have other ideas, I'm open to hearing whatever anybody's thinking. I try lots of different things. My business is really sort of consumer product oriented. But either way, it's like I'm just out there, just helping people do things.
Awesome. Well, I connected with Norty first on LinkedIn, and so I'll share that in the show notes. And you can also check out Moosylvania.com, and we'll put that in the show notes. And I really appreciate you coming on and spending time with us, Norty. This is excellent, and we'll definitely have you back again soon, okay?
Yeah, it was great fun. Thank you so much.
This show is brought to you by Today's Business Leaders. Learn more at our website, todaysbusinessleaders.com. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today.